So, Matt, we're in the Southern Highlands in the Heath Studios, and I stop here on the way to get my coffee before we begin. And in my coffee shop, there's a leaflet against the data center development happening in Mossvale. Now, you're a local in this area. Matt, tell us about the local angst about having a data center in their community.
And here's the pamphlet, by the way, folks, from the coffee shop. Nicely delivered to most households in the Southern Highlands, I think, today and over the last couple of days. But seriously, it's interesting, Peter, because, you know, we had our Cloud and Infrastructure Edge event a couple of weeks ago with Adapt, and you were on stage speaking to a number of, I would say, data center proponents, you know, from the head of the data center association to some actual data center builders themselves. And there's a lot of commentary now, which we'll come to a little bit later. But the point here is, I think, as we consider the local situation here in Mossvale, I don't think it's necessarily about the data center, but it's about the infrastructure that goes with the data center, and specifically the powering of that data center. Because the proposal is already slated for building data centers on industrial zoned land.
Yeah.
So by default, people know that's going to have something built on it, and just so happens to be a data center. So that in itself is not necessarily, I think, the challenge. We can't say, you know what, we're not going to have data centers built on industrial zoned land. Why not? Then we're going to say, well, we can't have warehouses built on industrial zoned land.
Or factories.
Right? We can't have a Bunnings built on industrial because they make too much noise. So it's not the data center itself. I think it's the proposal around gas-powered data centers, and specifically this one. And if we think back to the federal government's announcement a couple of weeks ago with Anthony Albanese and co around their data center and AI strategy, the point they made was that every new data center build has to be able to generate more power than it actually uses. And at the same time, it has to be renewable. And gas was specifically called out as a power source which wasn't to be encouraged unless in very small use cases. And we heard from, again, the head of Data Centers Australia on the panel you ran a week or so ago, and she made the point that maybe in limited use cases to augment the other power, gas can be a good option, as did, I think, Greg Borer from Canberra Data Centre made that point as well. But the difference here in Mossvale is that it's going to be completely generated by gas, and they're going to build net new gas power turbines to power it. To your average layman, you might think, well, so what? You know, a bit of gas power? What does that matter?
But to me, as an average layman, is why aren't you doing solar energy, or why aren't you doing wind energy? Why do you have to have gas in it? You know,
because the argument will always come back because you need consistent, reliable power, and you can't necessarily get that from wind.
Well, one of the people on that panel I was running, Wind DC. Well, how do you think they power their data centers? You know, they're wind-powered data centers, alternative energy.
Yeah,
but one of the other...
They are, but they're at a fairly small scale as well, Peter.
Well,
they're containerized data centers.
I imagine they are. I imagine they are. But one of the other panelists, Greg Borer from Canberra Data Centers, I mean, that's a big provider of data centers, and he made the point to me, Australia doesn't have an energy generation problem. It has a transmission problem. We have redundancy in our grid in transmission. We need to be looking at places like that to base our data centers. Why do we have to base it in Mossvale when there may be other parts on that grid where we could be tapping into redundant energy that we've got and using it?
Yeah, no, I'm with you altogether. And even I spoke to the clean energy operator in Canberra a few weeks ago, and that was a point that was made to me as well, is that they would prefer data center providers to be using power from the grid, which is kind of counter to what many people think. Because he said if they are using power from the grid, we can counter that through renewable and offsets and that kind of thing as well. So it's an absolutely true point. I guess the challenge we have, without getting into the technical weeds, Peter, is the pipes in and out of the data center. Yeah. Right. So you slap a data center in the middle of nowhere, and you've got no fiber connectivity to link it back to everything. So you've got to take that in mind. So an industrialized area such as in Mossvale obviously has got the infrastructure in place for that. It's in a good location between Sydney and Canberra. So again, I don't think it's the location of the data center. It's a rethink about how you power it. You said to me today, it's not always about opposing. It's about proposing an alternative.
Yes.
So I think we need to work collectively to think what the alternative to this is, because we'll never, in my view anyway, in most situations, you'll never get a data center rejected from a planning point of view because it's a data center.
No.
It will get rejected because of what that data center means to the environment
Yeah.
and to the situational position that it's actually in.
Yeah, but how much do you think this opposition to data centers, Matt, is a fear of AI? And AI is an intangible concept. You know, people can use it,
Yep.
but they can't touch it or kick it or. But a data center is something visible, and so if you're anxious about AI, does a data center in your community heighten that anxiety?
I don't think it's fear of AI. You know, I think there'll be a very small cohort potentially who are scared of AI. But at the end of the day, I think most people who are opposed to this, and again, I'm not saying I'm for or against. I'm against the way this could be powered. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I don't think we need to be, building essentially what in the long term could be power stations which could essentially power up to 70,000 homes, like for a single data center. That's 3 times the households in the Southern Highlands. So that's where my kind of situation is. I think absolutely there is a bit of fear around. It's not, I would say it's not even fear. It's lack of understanding and lack of awareness around artificial intelligence in general, because we're all using it.
Yeah.
Every time anyone gets on their phone, whether it's Gemini, whether it's Copilot, whether it's ChatGPT, everybody is using AI who uses a smart device multiple times a day, me included. Do I use Google search as much as I used to? No. Do I use Gemini? Yes. Okay, you could say it's the same thing.
No.
But that's Google search on steroids at the end of the day. And I might use Copilot for something, then I'll get Gemini to check it. So I'm using kind of AI in multiple situations. My point is everybody is.
Well, you see, but I think an AI is a tsunami we're not going to be able to stop. I mean, it's going to change and transform the world. I agree. It's totally here, but it needs fundamental infrastructure to make it work.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that infrastructure in Australia, it means we're importing our AI from overseas. So we're dependent on other people.
Yeah.
And as we saw with some of the Anthropic models, a president in the United States can say, those models aren't going to go outside the United States. And businesses in Australia using that model suddenly get them turned off and exposed to it.
I had a conversation about that just last week with a group of CIOs as well, who are considering should they be using, if you like, overseas LLMs, large language models, where the data goes in to actually allow us to access AI sort of capabilities. And the point they made was, well, if we potentially got some random president, I'll leave it at that, some random president with his or her finger on a kill switch, our business is at risk here. This is the biggest, business resilience risk we can potentially face. And, I was listening to our good friend Elon Musk in an interview the other day. And
Good friend?
Good friend. That was in inverted commas, Peter. Good friend Elon Musk. And he was saying on this interview when asked, how far away are we from AI really almost starting to take over, and he said 5 years away, to where AI will start making decisions, informed or ill-informed, for humans and for the human race. And so he said AI will pretty much do everything a human will do today without being a human. And she said, but isn't that a concern? Isn't that a worry? And the response back from him was, he said, well, in my view, 5 years from now, what this will mean for humanity is an abundance of capability, an abundance of opportunity, and you can get anything you want anytime. And I'm like, really? Or are we going to have like millions of people left behind while the likes of Messrs. Musk and Co.
Well, let's get back to let's get back.
Money.
We're going to a rabbit hole. We want to talk about this.
That's what it's all about.
Let's talk though about the data center issue, because we do need data centers in Australia if we're going to be sovereign in our use of AI and be in control. And if we're in a modern 21st century world and an economy built around that, we need to be in control of our destiny in that area. So how then do we reconcile these pressures? Because I'm seeing people instinctively opposing data centers with some arguments that I don't think are valid. And I'll give the argument of water.
Yep.
I heard a 7:30 debate the other day between Adam Brandt, who used to be the leader of the Greens. He's a lawyer. He was the #1 student at Murdoch University when he graduated in the 1990s. So he's not a stupid man, debating Belinda Dennett from the Data Center Corporation. And he made the point about a data center in Adelaide or South Australia that was going to consume the water from the Murray-Darling River. You know, and he said, this is going to really drain us. And all of the data center people I interviewed for that panel said to me, that's the old style of data center development, how you cool things through using water on it. The modern data center has a closed loop, like a radiator in a car. So that's how you contain the heat. None of these people who are opposing the data centers are talking about what's wrong with closed loop. Why is closed loop going to be a better use of water or not a good use of water?
Are data center builders today building closed loop systems?
Well, let me tell you, Greg Burra is. Let me tell you, Andrew from DC is. Let me tell you, Belinda Dennett from the data center said that's by far the most popular way of cooling systems. When Amar from Monash University have one of the most powerful.
So that's the point. That's the point here, Peter, because it comes back to education. And that's the point you're making.
But you can only educate someone if they're prepared to listen.
Yeah,
if people are not prepared to listen, if they have a closed mind, and what I'm saying, Matt, is I think some people have formed a closed mind against data centers without recognizing we need this infrastructure in Australia for our economic future and security. The issue is then, where do we base these data centers?
That's the issue. I think inherently, if you said to your Joe or your Jan Blow in the street, right, we're going to build a data center and we're going to put it in the middle of the Nullarbor plain.
Yeah.
They wouldn't give a toss.
Yeah.
Basically. That's the point, right?
Yeah, but they wouldn't have the internet connections that you just said.
Exactly. That's right. So do we need to be rethinking? Like, if you look at people like, Telstra with the Telstra Infraco, those kind of companies, when you start to look at how they're building out their pipes, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the pipes being basically the fiber to allow to connect data centers to each other and to businesses. When you look at how they're building those out, it kind of goes around the coast as usual within Australia. You get the odd one going in and out, that kind of thing. But you need to have almost a mesh of this, across the whole continent to make sure we can do that. But however, we can't have that until we've got all the other capabilities in place. So it's a classic cart before the horse.
No, Matt, it's a classic case in Australia. We need to be thinking about long-term planning for the development of this country. And that is, we cannot just leave it to the private sector to do it, because it's not in the private sector's interest. If you've ever been in sales, the path of sales is the path of least resistance. So that we need a government to make some tough decisions. We need to be thinking, how can we use data centers to develop this country?
But you could argue a government tried to make a tough decision. I'm not getting political here. I'm not on the fence on who I support. You could argue the Liberal Party tried to do that at the last election. With nuclear power.
Yeah.
You speak to most data centre proponents, Craig Scroggie being one of the biggest, Greg Borer, the whole lot of them, they'll all say we need nuclear power to really fuel this moving forward. And the one party that tried to take a long-term view on that got hammered for it.
Well, but you could go back even further and say the Labour Party tried to build a national broadcast national broadband network. Sorry, not broadcast. And what we've got is a sort of hodgepodge.
Of course we have, because we never have bipartisan agreement on what's best for the country. Because that doesn't win votes at the end of the day.
But when I was talking to Belinda from the data centres, she said the one difference between both the nuclear power proposition from the Liberals at the last election and the National Broadband Network is both relied on public money to actually make it work.
Yeah, of course.
She said the difference with data center, we're talking about private investment. What we've got to do is create an environment where we want that private investment to go. Now, you mentioned planning.
So you think we're going to get private investors investing into nuclear in Australia?
No, I didn't say that. I'm talking about data centers. I'm not talking about that.
But we're talking about the fundamentals about how we actually can enable these data centers.
Yeah.
And we need the infrastructure. It's not the government doesn't need to take a long-term view on building data centers.
No.
It needs to take a long-term view on building the infrastructure to enable a data center to actually work.
Or, Matt, setting the planning regulations. Now, you said there's land zoned for industrial use. So it's hard to say you can't put a data center there, but
absolutely.
you can put a factory there.
Yeah.
You've got to say, what is the land zoned for data center, a specific category, and identify locations in Australia where we can make these outside the community, help to develop regional Australia. Greg Boorer kept saying to me, this is an opportunity in Australia. This is a means to be a catalyst for how we facilitate this green transformation.
I'm all in. I'm totally all in, Peter. But we're coming back to the fact what we started talking about is it's not about the data center. It's about how we power those data centers,
Yes.
how we enable those data centers.
Yeah.
And that's what's fueling community resistance. The data center's already there in Mossvale.
Yeah.
Right? They've got one operating, it's built. But they want to expand it. And to expand it, they've got to add in sort of gas turbines and gas power.
Yeah.
Non-renewable energy. All right?
Okay.
We can get into the
So what you're
answer.
saying is it's not a virgin site with a data center.
Because no, it's not a virgin site. It's there and it's been approved for data centers.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge, I think, is again coming back to how it's essentially powered. And when you talked about renewables, most sites do not have the ability to build enough renewable capability to run a data center, right? Unless you get out into, whatever, and you've got hundreds of acres you can put sort of solar panels in. So most do not have the ability to do that. However, I think if they can work more effectively with people like the clean energy operator, the energy providers, and get that kind of mix in place. Because we had this conversation before when I asked these, cloud carrier who are building this gas power generation site. When I asked them about renewables, there wasn't any sort of indication that was bedded into their longer term plans. It was gas, right? And that's kind of all the way. And I think that's where the biggest resistance is ultimately coming from right now. So we need to consider what's a good alternative to that. So again, I'm all in on data centers. It is the future. I still believe we're heading for a massive crash in the whole AI space.
Well, that's another topic.
And a whole load of data centers and providers are going to come tumbling down.
Well, for a period. We had a dot-com crash, but it didn't kill the internet.
No, we did. But, how far is this going to go? Who actually knows at the end of the day?
Well, it looks like Matt and I have got to talk about this AI bubble that we're all talking about. So I think that's the next episode.
I think so. That's right. All right. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Good conversation.